When Emily Thompson first drove into the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, she felt an overwhelming sense of excitement. The neatly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and friendly waves from neighbors gave her the impression that this was exactly where she belonged, a peaceful place to start fresh. She had spent months searching for the perfect home, one that wasn't too far from her job but still offered a slice of serenity away from the chaos of city life. And here it was, a cozy two-bedroom house with a small backyard just big enough for morning coffee sessions under the shade of an old oak tree. On her first day in the neighborhood, Emily made it a point to introduce herself to her neighbors. She baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies, her grandmother's secret recipe, and walked around handing them out. Everyone seemed welcoming at first glance. There was Mr. Patel, a retired math teacher who always wore suspenders, Mrs. Dawson, a sweet elderly woman known for her prize-winning roses, and Jake, a young graphic designer who lived across the street and invited her over for pizza later that week. It all felt so warm and inviting, but there was one person who stood out among the rest, a woman named Karen. From the moment Emily met her, she could tell Karen wasn't like the others. While most people smiled warmly and exchanged pleasantries, Karen immediately launched into a lecture about HOA rules. "Welcome to Willow Creek," Karen said, holding up a thick binder labeled Homeowners Association Guidelines. "You'll want to familiarize yourself with these. They're very important." Her tone was firm, almost intimidating, as if she were daring Emily to break a rule before she'd even unpacked her boxes. At first, Emily brushed it off. She figured Karen was just passionate about keeping the neighborhood looking nice. After all, the streets were immaculate, and every house seemed to adhere to some unspoken standard of perfection. But as days turned into weeks, Emily began noticing little things about Karen that set off alarm bells. For instance, Karen would often patrol the block in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, jotting down notes whenever someone left their trash cans out past collection day or let their grass grow an inch taller than regulation height. She once scolded Mrs. Dawson for planting yellow daisies instead of the approved white ones, claiming they clashed with the aesthetic. Emily tried hard to stay on Karen's good side. She kept her lawn tidy, parked her car in the designated driveway space, and even painted her mailbox the exact shade of beige specified in the HOA guidelines. Still, no matter how careful she was, Karen always found something to criticize. One day, it was about a stray leaf blowing onto Emily's porch. Another time, it was because her Halloween decorations stayed up until November 3rd instead of being taken down on November 1st. Each complaint came via certified mail, complete with a detailed explanation and a deadline for resolution. Despite the growing tension, Emily refused to let Karen ruin her experience in Willow Creek. She loved her new home and cherished the friendships she was building with other residents. However, things took a turn when Emily accidentally parked in front of Karen's driveway during a community block party. She hadn't meant to. It was late, dark, and the parking spots near her house were full. But Karen didn't care. Within minutes, Karen stormed over, red-faced and shouting loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "This is private property," she barked, pointing dramatically at her driveway. "How dare you disrespect my space?" Feeling embarrassed and defensive, Emily apologized quickly and moved her car. But inside, she simmered with frustration. Why did Karen have to make such a scene? Wasn't it just a simple mistake? Instead of letting it go, Emily decided not to back down this time. When Karen continued ranting about boundaries and respect, Emily calmly replied, "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, but I think we can resolve this without making it a neighborhood spectacle." Karen looked taken aback by Emily's composure. Used to people cowering under her authority, she clearly hadn't expected resistance. Though Emily hoped the incident would blow over, it only fueled Karen's animosity. Over the next few weeks, Emily received a flurry of official-looking letters from the HOA detailing minor infractions. A crack in her sidewalk, which wasn't even hers. A missing house number, it was there, just slightly faded, and even a note about the color of her curtains being too bold. Each letter ended with a thinly veiled threat of fines if the issues weren't resolved promptly. By now, Emily realized she was dealing with more than just a stickler for rules. This was personal. Karen wasn't just enforcing guidelines, she was targeting Emily specifically. And while Emily didn't want to escalate the situation further, she also knew she couldn't keep bending over backward to appease someone who thrived on control. Little did she know this petty feud was about to spiral into something far bigger and far more ridiculous than either of them could have imagined. The stage was set for a showdown between two very different personalities. Emily, the calm and collected newcomer determined to live peacefully, and Karen, the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's perfection. Neither woman realized how much their clash would impact not only their lives but the entire neighborhood. What started as a minor disagreement over parking spaces was about to become a tale of revenge, technology, and unintended consequences that no one, not even Karen, could have predicted. The feud between Emily and Karen simmered quietly at first like a pot of water on low heat. It wasn't anything major, just small annoyances that seemed insignificant to most people, but grew increasingly personal for both women. Emily tried to ignore the nitpicky complaints from Karen, brushing them off as the quirks of an overzealous HOA leader. But Karen didn't stop. In fact, she doubled down, finding new ways to make Emily's life difficult. It started with the misplaced trash can incident. On recycling day, Emily accidentally left her blue bin slightly askew near the curb instead of perfectly aligned with the others. Most neighbors wouldn't have noticed or cared, but Karen did. The next morning, a typed-up notice appeared, taped to Emily's front door. Improper placement of recycling bins violates Section 4.2b of the HOA guidelines. Please rectify immediately. Emily rolled her eyes, adjusted the bin, and moved on. She figured it was just another one of Karen's obsessive tendencies and decided not to let it bother her. But then came the hedge issue. Emily had planted a small row of boxwood shrubs along the edge of her property to create some privacy. They were cute, green, and added charm to her yard. Unfortunately, according to Karen, they were exceeding the maximum allowable height by half an inch. When Emily received yet another formal warning in the mail, complete with measurements and references to obscure HOA clauses, she couldn't help but laugh. Half an inch? Really? Still, she trimmed the hedges back, thinking that would be the end of it. Karen, however, wasn't done. Every time Emily thought she'd finally gotten on Karen's good side, something else popped up. A missing house number, which wasn't actually missing. It had simply faded due to weather. A stray leaf blowing onto her porch during autumn, even the color of her curtains being deemed too bold for neighborhood standards. Each complaint arrived via certified mail, stamped with the official HOA seal, as if Karen wanted to remind Emily who held the power in Willow Creek. At this point, Emily began to feel less amused and more frustrated. She hadn't done anything wrong. Yet Karen treated her like she was deliberately trying to disrupt the harmony of the neighborhood. What made it worse was that no one else seemed to get the same level of scrutiny. Sure, Karen occasionally sent out reminders about lawn maintenance or holiday decorations, but nothing close to the relentless barrage Emily faced. It felt targeted, personal, and entirely unfair. Things reached a boiling point during the annual block party, a community event meant to bring everyone together. The entire neighborhood gathered in the cul-de-sac for food, games, and laughter. Kids ran around with balloons while adults chatted over lemonade and barbecue. Emily, eager to prove she wasn't the troublemaker Karen painted her to be, stayed, late to help clean up. As the evening drew to a close, she realized she'd forgotten where she'd parked her car. After circling the block twice, she spotted it, parked right in front of Karen's driveway. In hindsight, Emily knew it was a mistake. She hadn't meant to block access to Karen's garage. It was dark, and all the other parking spots near her house were full. But when Karen saw the car, she lost it. Storming outside in her slippers, she marched straight up to Emily, her face red with anger. "What is this?" Karen demanded, pointing dramatically at the vehicle. "You've parked in my driveway. This is private property." "I'm so sorry," Emily said quickly, grabbing her keys. "I'll move it right now." But Karen wasn't satisfied. Instead of letting it go, she launched into a tirade loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. How dare you disrespect my space? You think you can just do whatever you want because you're new here? Well, let me tell you something. You need to learn how things work in Willow Creek. Emily froze, mortified. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, and whispers rippled through the crowd. She could feel her cheeks burning as Karen continued berating her, making the situation far bigger than it needed to be. All Emily wanted to do was apologize and leave, but Karen wouldn't let her off the hook. For 10 excruciating minutes, Karen lectured her about boundaries, respect, and following the rules. When Emily finally managed to drive away, she felt humiliated and furious. Why had Karen made such a scene? It was a simple mistake, one anyone could have made. Yet Karen acted like Emily had committed a crime. That night, lying awake in bed, Emily replayed the confrontation over and over in her mind. She realized something important. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was using them as a weapon, a way to assert dominance and control. From that moment on, Emily resolved not to back down anymore. If Karen wanted to fight, fine. But Emily wasn't going to roll over and play the victim. Over the next few weeks, their feud escalated. Every minor infraction became a battleground. Karen issued warnings about everything from the color of Emily's doormat to the type of bird feeder hanging in her backyard. Each letter ended with thinly veiled threats of fines or further action if Emily failed to comply. Meanwhile, Emily started documenting everything. She took photos of her property, saved every piece of correspondence from Karen, and even recorded conversations when Karen called to complain. At first, she did this purely out of self-defense, wanting proof in case Karen ever tried to take things too far. But as the pile of evidence grew, Emily began to see a pattern. Karen wasn't just targeting her randomly. She was systematically trying to wear her down, hoping Emily would either give in or leave the neighborhood altogether. Despite the mounting pressure, Emily refused to let Karen win. She attended HOA meetings, spoke up when Karen proposed ridiculous new rules, and even rallied support from other residents who privately admitted they were tired of Karen's antics. Slowly but surely, Emily gained allies within the community. People admired her calm demeanor and willingness to stand up to Karen, qualities that contrasted sharply with Karen's aggressive approach. Still, Karen remained undeterred. She seemed determined to teach Emily a lesson no matter the cost. And soon her obsession with punishing Emily led her to cross a line she never should have crossed, a line that would have consequences far beyond anything she intended. Little did she know, her actions would not only affect Emily but the entire neighborhood, plunging everyone into chaos and turning what started as a petty feud into a story no one in Willow Creek would ever forget. As tensions continued to rise, Emily braced herself for whatever came next. She knew Karen wasn't the type to back down easily, and she suspected the worst was yet to come. But deep down, Emily also knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going anywhere. Whatever happened next, she would face it head-on, and maybe, just maybe, turn the tables on Karen once and for all. The tension between Emily and Karen had reached a boiling point, but neither woman could have predicted how far things would spiral out of control. What started as a series of petty disagreements was about to take a bizarre and chaotic turn, one that would leave the entire neighborhood reeling. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening. Emily had just settled into her favorite spot on the couch, a cup of tea in one hand and the remote in the other. She was looking forward to unwinding after a long day at work by streaming her favorite show. The house was calm, the only sounds coming from the hum of appliances and the occasional chirp of crickets outside. But as soon as she pressed play, the screen froze. A loading icon spun endlessly before giving way to an error message. No internet connection. At first, Emily assumed it was a temporary glitch. These things happened occasionally, didn't they? She restarted her router, checked the cables, and even unplugged everything for a full minute before powering it back on. Nothing worked. Frustrated, she called her internet provider's customer service line, only to be told there were no reported outages in her area. They promised to send a technician the next morning, though Emily knew that wouldn't fix her immediate problem. Without internet, she couldn't stream her show, check emails, or even scroll through social media to distract herself. As she sat staring at the blank TV screen, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text message, and it wasn't from anyone she expected. The sender was Karen. Consider this a reminder to follow the rules around here. Maybe now you'll learn some respect. Emily read the message twice, her heart pounding faster with each word. At first, she thought it was some kind of cruel joke. How could Karen possibly be responsible for shutting off her internet? Then again, nothing about Karen surprised her anymore. Determined to get answers, Emily grabbed her coat and headed outside. Streetlights cast long shadows across Willow Creek as Emily walked toward the main junction box located near the entrance of the development. This was where all the neighborhood's utilities converged, including the internet connection. As she approached, she noticed something odd. The lock on the metal cabinet door was broken, and the panel inside looked tampered with. Wires hung loose, and a few switches had been flipped to the off position. Her stomach sank. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the system. And given Karen's cryptic text, Emily had a sinking feeling she knew exactly who was behind it. Back home, Emily fired off a reply to Karen's message. "What did you do?" she typed, trying to keep her tone steady despite her rising anger. Within minutes, Karen responded, "You brought this on yourself. Keep ignoring the rules and see what happens." That was all the confirmation Emily needed. Somehow Karen had accessed the junction box and shut off her internet. But why go to such lengths? Was this really about enforcing HOA guidelines, or was it pure revenge? Determined to document everything, Emily snapped photos of the damaged junction box and saved screenshots of Karen's messages. She also messaged a few trusted neighbors asking if they were experiencing similar issues. To her surprise, several people replied almost immediately. Their internet was down too. Some complained about missing important work deadlines, while others worried about their kids not being able to attend online classes. One neighbor even mentioned losing access to her smart home security system, leaving her feeling uneasy overnight. By morning, the situation had spiraled out of control. Word spread quickly throughout Willow Creek that the entire neighborhood's internet service had been disrupted. Parents scrambled to figure out how their children would complete school assignments without Wi-Fi. Freelancers and remote workers panicked as deadlines loomed and video conferences failed to connect. Even local businesses operating out of home, offices were affected, with customers complaining about delayed responses and missed orders. When the internet provider finally sent a technician to investigate, the truth came to light. After inspecting the junction box, the technician explained that someone had intentionally tampered with the equipment. Worse still, because Willow Creek shared a centralized infrastructure, disabling one part of the system had caused a cascading failure that took down the entire network. The technician shook his head as he worked, muttering about how dangerous it was for untrained individuals to mess with utility connections. Meanwhile, rumors began circulating among residents about who might be responsible. Initially, everyone assumed it was vandalism by outsiders, perhaps teenagers looking for trouble. But when Emily showed her evidence to a few close neighbors, the pieces started falling into place. Screenshots of Karen's messages combined with eyewitness accounts of her patrolling the area late at night painted a damning picture. Slowly but surely, suspicion turned toward Karen. Karen, however, remained defiant. When confronted by concerned neighbors during an impromptu gathering in the cul-de-sac, she denied any involvement. "I'm just as upset about this as you are," she insisted, clutching her clipboard tightly. But clearly someone doesn't understand the importance of following proper procedures. Her attempt to deflect blame only made her seem guiltier, especially since she conveniently avoided answering questions about why she'd sent threatening texts to Emily. As tempers flared and accusations flew, Emily stepped forward. Holding up her phone, she calmly presented the screenshots of Karen's messages alongside photos of the damaged junction box. "This isn't about me breaking HOA rules anymore," she said, addressing the crowd. "This is about someone taking matters into their own hands and putting the entire neighborhood at risk. We deserve answers." and accountability. Her words struck a chord with the residents. Many nodded in agreement, while others murmured angrily about Karen's behavior. For months, they'd tolerated her overbearing attitude and nitpicky enforcement of trivial rules. But this went too far. Shutting off the internet wasn't just inconvenient, it was reckless and potentially dangerous. Karen, realizing she was losing control of the narrative, tried to double down. "Even if I did access the junction box, it was only supposed to affect Emily," she blurted out, immediately regretting her words. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the admission sunk in. Not only had Karen admitted to tampering with utility equipment, but she'd also revealed her true motive: revenge against Emily. For a moment, there was silence. Then slowly, the murmurs turned into outright condemnation. Neighbors who had once feared crossing Karen now openly criticized her actions. Mr. Patel, usually soft-spoken, spoke up first. "This isn't leadership, Karen. This is abuse of power." Mrs. Dawson chimed in next, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've gone too far this time. You've hurt all of us." Karen's face flushed red as she stammered excuses, but no one was listening anymore. The tide had turned decisively against her, and she knew it. What began as a personal vendetta against Emily had blown up in her face, exposing her vindictive nature to the entire community. Worst of all, she had inadvertently caused chaos for dozens of innocent families, making her the villain of Willow Creek. As the day wore on, residents began filing formal complaints, not just with the HOA but also with local authorities. Tampering with utility equipment was illegal, and Karen's actions could result in serious consequences. Meanwhile, Emily emerged as an unexpected hero. By standing up to Karen and presenting evidence of her wrongdoing, she inspired others to speak out against years of unchecked authority. Though the internet technician managed to restore service by late afternoon, the damage had already been done. Trust in Karen's leadership had shattered beyond repair. The neighborhood was abuzz with talk of replacing her as HOA president, and many residents urged Emily to consider running for the position herself. For now, Emily focused on supporting her neighbors and ensuring Karen faced accountability for her actions. As the sun set over Willow Creek, Emily reflected on how quickly things had changed. What started as a minor feud had escalated into a neighborhood-wide crisis, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about power, fairness, and community. Though the ordeal had been exhausting, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Sometimes, even the most chaotic situations can lead to positive change, and in Willow Creek that change was just beginning. By the time the sun rose over Willow Creek the next morning, the fallout from Karen's actions had rippled through every corner of the neighborhood. The internet outage may have been resolved, but its effects lingered like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate. Parents were frazzled, children were behind on schoolwork, and adults who relied on their online connections for work or personal tasks felt the weight of lost productivity. What had started as a personal vendetta between Karen and Emily had spiraled into a full-blown community crisis, and everyone was pointing fingers at Karen. The first sign that things were about to get ugly came during breakfast. Neighbors gathered in small clusters outside their homes, discussing the events of the previous day. Conversations buzzed with frustration and disbelief. "Can you believe she actually admitted to doing it?" one woman asked her neighbor while sipping coffee on her porch. "She said it herself. She meant to shut off Emily's internet, not ours." Another man shook his head angrily. "This isn't just incompetence, it's sabotage. She put us all at risk." As the morning wore on, these informal discussions turned into organized outrage. A group of residents decided to hold an emergency meeting right there in the cul-de-sac. Chairs were dragged out of garages, and someone set up a folding table to serve as a makeshift podium. Within minutes, nearly 30 people had gathered, some still in pajamas, others clutching cups of coffee or notebooks filled with grievances. The atmosphere was tense but electric, charged with a mix of anger and determination. Karen showed up too, though clearly reluctantly. She walked stiffly toward the crowd, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Her usual air of authority seemed diminished, replaced by nervous glances and fidgety movements. When she tried to take her usual spot at the front of the gathering, several neighbors blocked her path. "You don't get to lead this meeting," Mr. Patel said firmly, stepping forward. His voice carried an edge none of them had heard before. "Not after what you've done." For once, Karen didn't argue. Instead, she retreated to the back of the group where she stood silently, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact with anyone. It was a stark contrast to her usual domineering presence, and it only fueled the growing resentment among the residents. Emily took charge of the meeting, standing at the center of the circle. She began by summarizing everything that had happened, laying out the facts clearly and calmly. She held up her phone to display screenshots of Karen's incriminating texts and photos of the damaged junction box. "This isn't about me anymore," she said, addressing the crowd. "It's about holding someone accountable when they abuse their power. We trusted Karen to act in our best interests, but instead she endangered the entire neighborhood because of a personal grudge." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd. People nodded vigorously, murmuring agreement. One by one, neighbors stood up to share their stories of how the internet outage had impacted them. A young mother tearfully described how her son had missed an important exam because he couldn't access his virtual classroom. A freelance graphic designer explained how he'd lost thousands of dollars worth of contracts due to missed deadlines. Even Mrs. Dawson chimed in, recounting how her smart home system had malfunctioned without Wi-Fi, leaving her feeling vulnerable overnight. Each story added fuel to the fire, turning the meeting into something more than just a complaint session. It became a reckoning. Residents weren't just upset about the inconvenience, they were furious about the breach of trust. Karen wasn't just a strict HOA leader anymore. She was a symbol of unchecked authority, someone who had let her ego override common sense and basic decency. When it was Karen's turn to speak, the tension in the air was palpable. For a moment she hesitated, looking around at the sea of angry faces staring back at her. Then, in a shaky voice, she attempted to defend herself. "I never meant for this to happen," she began, clutching her clipboard tightly. "Yes, I accessed the junction box, but it was only supposed to affect Emily's connection. I didn't know it would shut off everyone else's service." Her explanation fell flat. Instead of sympathy, it elicited groans and jeers from the crowd. "That's not an excuse," someone shouted. "You tampered with equipment you had no business touching." Another resident added, "Do you even realize how dangerous that is? Someone could have been seriously hurt." Karen tried to backtrack, stammering excuses and deflecting blame onto Emily. If she hadn't ignored the rules in the first place, none of this would have happened. But her attempts to shift responsibility only made matters worse. The crowd erupted into loud protests, drowning out her words. Someone even suggested calling the police to report the incident as vandalism, a suggestion that drew murmurs of approval from several attendees. As the meeting continued, the mood shifted from anger to action. Residents began brainstorming ways to address the situation and prevent anything like this from happening again. They drafted a formal letter to local authorities, detailing Karen's actions and requesting an investigation. Others proposed revising the HOA bylaws to limit the president's powers and ensure greater transparency moving forward. Ideas flowed freely, and for the first time in months, the neighborhood felt united, not against each other, but against a shared adversary. Throughout it all, Karen remained silent, shrinking further into the background. Gone was the confident, authoritarian figure who once ruled Willow Creek with an iron fist. In her place stood a humbled, defeated woman who finally understood the consequences of her actions. Yet even as the tide turned decisively against her, she refused to step down voluntarily. "I'll resign when the board votes me out," she muttered under her breath, though no one paid much attention. By the end of the meeting, the residents had accomplished two key goals: documenting the evidence needed to hold Karen accountable, and rallying support for systemic change within the HOA. As chairs were folded and tables packed away, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. The chaos caused by Karen's actions had exposed deep flaws in the neighborhood's leadership structure, but it had also sparked a movement toward accountability and reform. Emily stayed behind to help clean up, chatting with neighbors who thanked her for stepping up. Many encouraged her to consider running for HOA president, praising her calm demeanor and ability to unite the community during a difficult time. Though flattered, Emily hesitated. Taking on such a role would require significant time and effort, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of responsibility. Still, she promised to think about it. As the day drew to a close, Emily returned home feeling both drained and energized. The past 24 hours had been overwhelming, but they had also shown her the strength of her community. Despite the challenges they faced, the residents of Willow Creek had come together to demand justice, and in doing so, they had taken the first steps toward healing and rebuilding. Little did Emily or anyone else know, however, that the drama was far from over. While Karen's grip on the neighborhood had loosened, she wasn't ready to give up entirely. And as tensions simmered beneath the surface, new conflicts loomed on the horizon, threatening to test the resilience of the community once again. The fallout from Karen's actions continued to reverberate through Willow Creek, but the neighborhood wasn't done dealing with her yet. If anything, the chaos she had unleashed only deepened the resolve of its residents to hold her accountable and ensure that no one else could wield unchecked power in the future. What followed was a whirlwind of legal battles, public confrontations, and soul-searching that would reshape the community forever. It didn't take long for the formal complaints against Karen to escalate into something more serious. The letter, drafted during the emergency meeting, made its way to local authorities, along with Emily's evidence. Screenshots of Karen's texts, photos of the damaged junction box, and witness statements from neighbors who saw Karen near the utility cabinet, late at night. Initially, some residents were hesitant about involving law enforcement, fearing it might create unnecessary drama. But as stories of financial losses and disrupted lives piled up, consensus grew. Karen's behavior couldn't be ignored. Within days, investigators arrived in Willow Creek to examine the situation. They interviewed residents, inspected the junction box, and reviewed security footage from nearby homes, where available. To everyone's surprise, one neighbor's doorbell camera captured grainy footage of Karen standing near the utility cabinet around the time the outage occurred. Though the video quality wasn't perfect, it clearly showed her tampering with the equipment, a damning piece of evidence that sealed her fate. As news of the investigation spread, Karen became increasingly isolated. Neighbors who once tolerated her authoritarian ways now avoided her altogether. Even those who hadn't been particularly vocal about their frustrations began crossing the street to avoid awkward encounters. For someone like Karen, who thrived on control and attention, this sudden ostracism hit hard. She spent most of her days pacing inside her house, peeking through the blinds to see if anyone was watching or talking about her. At night, she barely slept, haunted by the realization that she might face criminal charges for her reckless actions. Meanwhile, the HOA board convened an emergency session to discuss Karen's future as president. Technically, she still held the position until officially removed, but her credibility had crumbled. Attendance at the meeting was unusually high, with nearly every household sending a representative. The room buzzed with tension as members debated what steps to take next. Some argued for immediate removal, citing Karen's admission of guilt and blatant disregard for community safety. Others suggested waiting for the legal process to play out before making any final decisions. Emily attended the meeting too, sitting quietly in the back while others argued passionately. When called upon to speak, she addressed the group calmly but firmly. "This isn't just about Karen anymore," she said. "It's about setting a precedent for how we handle leadership in this neighborhood. If someone abuses their power and endangers the community, they shouldn't be allowed to stay in charge, even temporarily." Her words struck a chord, shifting the tone of the discussion. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to suspend Karen from her duties pending further review. While not a permanent solution, it marked a significant step toward reclaiming the HOA's integrity. A temporary chairperson was appointed to oversee day-to-day operations, and plans were made to hold a special election for a new president within the month. Karen, however, refused to accept defeat gracefully. In a desperate bid to salvage her reputation, she launched a smear campaign against Emily, accusing her of manipulating the neighborhood for personal gain. Flyers mysteriously appeared on doorsteps overnight, claiming Emily had orchestrated the entire incident to oust Karen and seize control of the HOA. The accusations were baseless, but they rattled some residents who weren't fully aware of the facts. Determined to counteract Karen's lies, Emily organized another community gathering. This time she invited everyone, not just HOA members, to attend. Armed with documents, photos, and even the doorbell camera footage, she laid out the timeline of events in painstaking detail. "I didn't ask for this," she told the crowd, "but when someone puts our safety at risk because of a personal grudge, I believe it's my responsibility to stand up and say something." Her transparency won over even the skeptics. Many neighbors expressed regret for doubting her and thanked her for bringing the truth to light. One man stood up and apologized publicly, admitting he'd briefly fallen for Karen's propaganda. "We let fear divide us," he said. "But today, we're stronger because we chose to trust each other instead." With Karen's influence waning, the focus shifted toward rebuilding the HOA and restoring trust in its leadership. Residents worked together to draft new guidelines aimed at preventing similar crises in the future. These included stricter rules about accessing shared utilities, mandatory training for board members, and regular audits to ensure transparency. The changes weren't just practical, they were symbolic, representing a collective commitment to fairness and cooperation. Amid all the turmoil, Emily found herself thrust into the spotlight as a potential candidate for HOA president. Despite her initial hesitation, she warmed to the idea after seeing how much support she had from her neighbors. Encouraged by friends and inspired by the progress they'd already made, she decided to run for the position. Her campaign focused on inclusivity, communication, and fostering a sense of community pride, values diametrically opposed to Karen's authoritarian style. Karen, meanwhile, attempted a last-ditch effort to retain relevance by running against Emily in the election. She plastered flyers across the neighborhood, promising to restore order and protect property values. But her promises rang hollow after everything that had happened. Few people took her candidacy seriously, and many openly mocked her attempts to win back favor. On the day of the election, turnout was unprecedented. Nearly every household participated, eager to have a say in shaping the neighborhood's future. When the votes were counted, the results were decisive. Emily won by a landslide, earning nearly 90% of the ballots cast. As she accepted congratulations from her neighbors, tears welled up in her eyes, not from pride but from gratitude. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Together, they had faced adversity and emerged stronger for it. For Karen, the loss was devastating. Stripped of her title, credibility, and social standing, she retreated into solitude. Some speculated she might move away, unable to bear the shame of living among those she had wronged. Others hoped she would use the experience as an opportunity to reflect and grow. Either way, her reign of micromanagement was over, for good. As the dust settled, Willow Creek began to heal. The scars of the past weeks wouldn't disappear overnight, but the community had proven its resilience. Through unity and determination, they had transformed a crisis into a catalyst for positive change. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, one thing was certain: the spirit of Willow Creek was alive and well, and ready to thrive under new leadership.